The cameras adored him. Studio executives trusted him. Parents felt safe letting their children grow up watching him every week. On brightly lit sound stages in Los Angeles, laughter followed his every line, and audiences believed they were witnessing something pure, a childhood unfolding naturally on screen. But behind rehearsed smiles and carefully managed interviews, something subtle began to shift. Crew members noticed tension where there used to be ease. Scenes required more retakes. Public appearances grew shorter, more controlled. Then, without scandal or headline, the momentum stopped. No dramatic fall, no public breakdown, just a quiet, calculated disappearance that no one fully explained. At the height of children's television dominance, networks like Nickelodeon and Disney Channel were manufacturing global fame for actors barely old enough to understand contracts. Sitcom sets in Los Angeles became launchpads for instant celebrity, turning ordinary kids into multi-million-dollar brands almost overnight. This child star was one of the most promising. Casting agents praised his timing, executives admired his reliability. Marketing teams built campaigns around his face. For a few years, everything followed the predictable arc of youthful success: awards shows, magazine covers, sold-out meet and greets. But behind the scenes, the machinery of fame was far more complex than fans realized. Production schedules tightened, public appearances were carefully filtered, certain interviews never aired. Nothing overtly scandalous happened, no explosive headline announced a downfall. Instead, what unfolded was quieter and far more unsettling. The studio lot in Burbank didn't look mysterious from the outside. It was practical. Low beige buildings, gated entry points, security kiosks where guards scanned badges with mechanical indifference. Tour buses occasionally drove past, their passengers hoping to glimpse celebrities through tinted windows. What they couldn't see were the controlled ecosystems operating behind those gates. Inside Stage 12, where the child star's breakout series was filmed, everything was engineered for predictability. Artificial living rooms stood beneath grids of scorching lights. A kitchen set, complete with fake cabinets and foam countertops, could be dismantled within hours and rebuilt for another show. Laughter tracks were tested for warmth. Applause levels were measured. Even spontaneity was rehearsed. For a child, it was an unusual environment to grow up in. California labor laws required on-set tutors, and a small classroom trailer sat parked beside wardrobe. Between takes, the young actors rotated through math worksheets and reading assignments. Studio teachers logged hours meticulously to ensure compliance. Education was technically protected, but fragmented. Lessons paused whenever directors called for rehearsals. Concentration competed with memorized dialogue. The rhythm of production was relentless. Table reads on Monday, blocking on Tuesday. Camera rehearsals midweek, live audience taping by Friday night. Scripts were revised constantly, punchlines sharpened to maintain ratings. Writers hovered near the stage, scribbling last-minute adjustments, while assistant directors checked schedules down to the minute. Crew members later described the atmosphere as efficient but tense. Children, by nature unpredictable, were expected to hit marks precisely taped on the floor. Emotional scenes had to be summoned instantly, then switched off just as quickly. If energy dipped, producers intervened. If timing slipped, another take was ordered. In the early seasons, the child star adapted seamlessly. He laughed between setups, mimicked crew members for fun, and improvised small gestures that made it into final cuts. Directors praised his instincts. The studio audience responded enthusiastically. Executives took notice. Success accelerated expectations. Publicists began scheduling appearances beyond the lot: morning shows in New York, promotional events in Orlando, red carpet premieres along Hollywood Boulevard. Each appearance required coaching: what to say, what not to say, how long to pause before answering questions about school or friendships. Image management became another layer of performance. Back at the studio, subtle changes emerged. Crew logs reflected longer rehearsal periods. Dialogue coaches spent extended time reviewing scenes that once required minimal correction. Makeup artists noticed fatigue beneath stage lighting, circles under the eyes, a restlessness during touch-ups. No one described dramatic outbursts. It was quieter than that. A pause before delivering lines that had once flowed easily, a distracted gaze during blocking rehearsals, moments of visible withdrawal when camera stopped rolling. Child psychology experts often note that high-pressure performance environments can blur boundaries between role and identity. On stage 12, the line between character and child was thin. The show's personality, cheerful, mischievous, endlessly resilient, became synonymous with the actor portraying it. Fans didn't separate them. Sometimes neither did the adults shaping the production. Parents were ever present. One waited near the monitors during filming, offering encouragement between takes. The other managed scheduling conversations with producers. Their involvement was described as attentive, though occasionally assertive when negotiating contract terms or script adjustments. Behind closed doors in production offices, meetings became more frequent. Scheduling shifts were discussed, contingency plans quietly drafted. Insurance representatives visited the set more than once during the later filming cycle. Routine, perhaps, but noticed. To the public, the set remained vibrant and seamless. Episodes aired weekly without interruption, promotional posters filled shopping malls. The brand appeared stable. Yet within that carefully constructed space, beneath the bright lights and synchronized laughter, the environment was tightening. Expectations expanded, flexibility narrowed. The place had not changed physically. The sets still stood, the scripts still arrived on time, but the atmosphere felt heavier. And in controlled environments, heaviness rarely goes unnoticed, even if it goes unspoken. Public memory is built on what is preserved. Press releases, archived interviews, contract announcements, ratings reports. On paper, the child star's career looked seamless, a steady climb supported by numbers that executives proudly cited in shareholder meetings. Trade publications praised the show's performance in key demographics. Advertising slots during new episodes sold at premium rates. Merchandise licensing agreements expanded into backpacks, lunchboxes, and branded video games. From the outside, the trajectory followed a familiar formula: talent discovered, audience captured, franchise secured. But records don't just reveal what happened. They reveal what was emphasized and what was quietly adjusted. Production documents from the later seasons show subtle modifications. Shooting schedules were restructured, with more interior scenes replacing physically demanding sequences. Scripts contained fewer emotionally intense arcs for the central character. Dialogue blocks shortened. None of this was dramatic enough to draw headlines, yet it reflected adaptation. Insurance filings, standard and productions involving minors were updated mid-cycle. Entertainment attorneys reviewing similar cases explained that such updates can be routine, but timing matters. Adjustments often occur when risk assessments change, whether due to scheduling strain, on-set injuries, or performance unpredictability. At the same time, press patterns shifted. In earlier seasons, the child star participated in extended interviews, daytime talk shows, magazine features, press junkets where reporters asked about hobbies and favorite subjects in school. Later, those appearances became shorter, more structured. Questions were pre-screened, interview windows tightened. One scheduled appearance on a nationally syndicated program was canceled within hours of taping. Official explanation: logistical conflict. No further clarification. Digital footprints tell their own story. Archived promotional pages from the network's website were updated, removing certain behind-the-scenes clips. Fan forums from that period reference interviews that no longer appear in the network's official media library. This doesn't imply conspiracy. Media libraries are frequently reorganized. Content is removed for licensing or formatting reasons. But when multiple small removals cluster within the same time frame, researchers take notice. Contractual filings also reflect nuance. While the series was renewed publicly for additional development discussions, renewal language grew increasingly conditional. Phrases such as "subject to mutual creative alignment" appeared more frequently in public-facing statements. Those words are legally cautious. They signal negotiation. Former studio executives, speaking generally about child-led productions, explain that when performance dynamics change, networks often prioritize brand preservation. Scripts may be retooled, supporting characters expanded to distribute narrative weight, marketing campaigns adjusted to emphasize ensemble casts rather than a single focal point. The goal isn't to alarm audiences, it's to stabilize perception. Financial disclosures reveal that at the height of fame, trust accounts were established under state-mandated child performer protection laws. That's standard practice in California. However, property investments linked to the family appeared unusually rapid within a short period. Wealth management advisors were brought in quickly. Success accelerated responsibility, but success can also complicate relationships. When journalists later attempted retrospective interviews, responses from the network followed identical phrasing across multiple outlets. "We value the contributions made during that time and wish all parties well." Notably absent were detailed reflections on the series' abrupt conclusion. No farewell special, no anniversary reunion, no commemorative episode added to streaming platforms. The archive felt incomplete. Researchers examining the production timeline observed that internal memos referenced in trade coverage were never released publicly. Some were reportedly sealed under minor privacy protections. That, again, is not unusual, but it creates gaps. And gaps invite speculation. In historical investigations, absence can be as revealing as evidence, not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it suggests intentional curation. What remains in the official record is polished, ratings triumphs, smiling press photos, statements of gratitude. What's missing are the transitional moments, the meetings, the recalibrations, the cautious language shifts that signal strain beneath success. Records rarely shout, they whisper. And in this case, the whispers suggest a production quietly adapting to something it preferred not to define openly. The story preserved in public archives is one of achievement. The story implied between the lines is one of management. Not collapse, not scandal, management. And sometimes management tells you more than chaos ever could.
Fame rarely belongs to a child alone. Behind every audition, every contract signature, every relocation across state lines, there is a family recalibrating its entire existence around possibility. In this case, that recalibration happened quickly. Before the series, life was structured around school calendars and weekend activities. After the pilot episode tested successfully, everything shifted toward opportunity. The family relocated to Southern California, renting a home within driving distance of the studio lot. The neighborhood was gated, quiet, populated by others who understood privacy as currency. At first, the transition appeared unified. One parent took on the role of daily on-set guardian, seated near the monitors during filming. The other handled logistics, meetings with agents, reviewing scripts, negotiating appearance fees. Together, they functioned as both caretakers and managers, a dual role common in child entertainment. But dual roles can blur lines. Former neighbors later described an atmosphere of intensity rather than extravagance. Deliveries arrived frequently: wardrobe packages, promotional materials, studio correspondence. Black SUVs transported the child to events with punctual precision. Security systems were upgraded shortly after the first season aired. Outwardly, it looked like prudent adjustment to visibility. Privately, the household rhythm began revolving entirely around production cycles. Tutoring schedules extended into evenings. Public appearance rehearsals were practiced at the dining table. Interviews were simulated so answers felt polished and spontaneous at the same time. Conversations once centered on homework or friendships now centered on ratings and renewal rumors. Children often adapt quickly to adult expectations, but adaptation does not equal immunity. Associates who interacted with the family during this period described contrasting impressions. Some saw dedication, parents fiercely protective of their child's career trajectory. Others noticed friction during negotiations, particularly when scripts introduced heavier emotional scenes or physically demanding sequences. Contracts became more complex with each renewal. Compensation increased. So did performance obligations. When marketing partnerships expanded, additional travel commitments were required. Endorsement appearances cut into rest days. Financial advisors were brought into the picture earlier than typical for performers of that age. Trust accounts were structured under California's Coogan Law, designed to protect earnings for child actors. Property investments followed, framed publicly as prudent long-term planning. Health, however, introduces its own pressures. Discussions about diversification, investment portfolios, and tax strategies are adult conversations. When those conversations happen within earshot of someone still memorizing algebra formulas, boundaries compress. Neighbors recall moments of normalcy: the child riding a bicycle in the cul-de-sac, laughter audible during summer evenings. Yet there were also extended periods when curtains remained drawn and activity seemed confined indoors. Arguments were never confirmed publicly, but raised voices were occasionally overheard from the driveway. Industry insiders note that tension during high-stakes contract negotiations is common. Disagreements about creative direction or workload can spill beyond conference rooms. The more fame expanded, the more the household became an operational headquarters. Phone calls with agents occurred late into the night due to cross-country time zones. Email correspondence from studio executives required rapid responses. Decisions about accepting or declining projects made financial consequences measured in millions. The child star, meanwhile, existed at the center of these discussions, both beneficiary and subject. Psychologists who study child performers often emphasize the strain of role confusion. When a young person becomes a primary income source, family dynamics can subtly invert. Authority may remain intact on paper, but emotional expectations shift. Gratitude is implied. Responsibility is internalized. There is no verified evidence of exploitation in this case, no court records alleging misconduct. What exists, instead, is a pattern common in high-pressure entertainment households: accelerated adulthood. School friends were replaced by co-stars. Playdates were scheduled around tapings. Vacations doubled as promotional tours. Success was not accidental. It was engineered, collaboratively. But engineering childhood carries risk. When cracks began appearing on set, missed lines, fatigue, quiet withdrawal, the family faced an unspoken crossroads: slow down and recalibrate, or press forward and preserve momentum. Publicly, momentum prevailed. Privately, the balance may have been harder to maintain than anyone admitted. In the end, families in the spotlight rarely fracture in obvious ways. They strain gradually, adjusting to forces larger than their living rooms. And sometimes, by the time anyone recognizes the weight of that strain, silence has already begun to settle.
Silence in Hollywood does not arrive dramatically. It settles. At first, it feels temporary, a scheduling gap, a strategic pause between seasons. Publicists describe it as time off. Networks frame it as creative recalibration. Fans assume a return is already planned. When the announcement came that the series would not move forward, the wording was measured. There was gratitude for the cast, appreciation for loyal viewers, no indication of crisis. No farewell episode to signal closure, just a brief statement and a pivot to upcoming programming. The production offices cleared quietly. Sets were dismantled with industrial efficiency. Painted walls that had served as fictional homes were stripped back to plywood. The living room that once echoed with studio laughter became an empty soundstage again. For crew members, this was routine. Shows end, contracts expire, new pilots take their place. But something about this ending felt incomplete. There was no final press tour, no commemorative magazine spread reflecting on the show's cultural impact. Syndication packages were negotiated, yet promotional emphasis shifted toward ensemble cast members rather than the former central figure. The child star's public presence narrowed almost overnight. Social media accounts that had once posted weekly updates fell dormant. Scheduled fan events were postponed, then quietly removed from ticketing platforms. Autographed merchandise listings disappeared from official stores. Entertainment journalists reached out for interviews. Requests were declined. Again, no scandal. No viral incident. No courtroom filings. Just distance. Industry observers note that reputational management often operates through absence rather than confrontation. When complications arise that are not criminal but potentially destabilizing to brand identity, studios tend to reduce visibility rather than escalate narrative. In this case, the reduction was gradual but unmistakable. Reruns aired less frequently in prime slots. Promotional trailers featuring the child star rotated out sooner than expected. Press archives updated headshots, sometimes favoring earlier promotional photos over later ones. Language shifted subtly. Where interviews once highlighted individual charisma, later summaries emphasized ensemble chemistry. Where awards campaigns once centered the young actor's performance, newer marketing materials framed the show as a collective achievement. It was a reframing, not an erasure, but a dilution. Within the family's gated neighborhood, movement also decreased. The SUVs still arrived occasionally, but less predictably. Curtains remained drawn for longer stretches. Holiday decorations appeared later than usual, then not at all. Speculation began to circulate online. Fan forums questioned the abruptness. Some suggested burnout, others theorized contractual disputes. A few exaggerated rumors spiraled briefly before losing traction due to lack of evidence. What made the silence unsettling was its precision. There were no emotional interviews to humanize the pause, no candid confessionals about needing rest. Even narratives of mental health breaks, common in modern entertainment cycles, were absent. Instead, there was an almost clinical retreat. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called identity foreclosure, where individuals prematurely commit to roles that leave little room for exploration. When that role dissolves suddenly, the absence can feel disorienting, not only for the performer, but for the audience that defined them by it. For years, viewers had associated the child star with resilience and humor. That persona had been consistent, dependable. The sudden absence created cognitive dissonance. How does someone so visible become unreachable so quickly? Industry insiders, speaking generally about similar situations, often describe the period after child stardom as volatile. Agents reassess marketability, publicists reconsider positioning, families renegotiate boundaries. Some step back intentionally to prevent overexposure. But here, the step back felt absolute. No independent film roles emerged, no transition into voice acting, no gradual maturation into teen-focused programming. The spotlight switched off and stayed off. In entertainment history, dramatic downfalls leave paper trails. Quiet disappearances leave questions. And in the quiet that followed this production's end, the most striking detail was not what happened, but what did not. There was no public goodbye. Only the echo of a studio audience that once applauded on cue. And then, nothing.
For several years, the story remained dormant. The episodes continued to stream quietly. Nostalgia accounts reposted clips. A generation that had grown up watching the show moved into adulthood, carrying fond memories but few answers. Then, unexpectedly,
The silence shifted. It began with a long-form podcast interview recorded in a modest studio apartment in North Hollywood. The guest was not a headline name, just a former production assistant who had worked on multiple children's series filmed in Burbank. The conversation was casual at first, filled with anecdotes about late-night script changes and chaotic wardrobe mishaps. But midway through the episode, the assistant paused. Without naming individuals, they described a lead actor on a youth sitcom whose behavior changed dramatically during the final production cycle. Not violent, not criminal, just different. Longer periods of withdrawal between takes, difficulty maintaining focus during rehearsals, heightened emotional responses to minor script adjustments. The assistant emphasized there had been no confirmed wrongdoing, only concern. The clips circulated online within hours. Listeners began drawing connections. Online forums revived. Archived interviews were revisited. Fans replayed episodes from the later season, scrutinizing facial expressions and line deliveries for signs they might have missed. Around the same time, a minor legal filing surfaced in Los Angeles County's civil court archives. Not a lawsuit, but a sealed mediation reference between a family representative and a production entity. The contents were not public, only the existence of the mediation was visible. Legal analysts clarified that mediation is common in entertainment disputes. It can involve compensation terms, creative control disagreements, or scheduling conflicts. Sealed records are especially typical when minors are involved. Still, the timing aligned with the show's abrupt end. Former crew members began speaking in broader terms about intense environments on child-led productions. No one accused the network of abuse, no one alleged criminal conduct, but phrases like unsustainable pressure and emotional fatigue appeared repeatedly. A former dialogue coach, contacted by a journalist years later, offered a carefully worded statement, quote, "Children in performance roles require structured psychological support. When the structure weakens, strain shows." End quote. That comment drew attention to another detail, a brief hiring of an on-set welfare consultant during the final season. Payroll records indicated the consultant's contract lasted only several weeks. Why so brief? Studios sometimes bring in specialists for short-term evaluations. That alone proves nothing, but it suggested that concern had reached a formal level. Then came a photograph. Not scandalous, not incriminating. It was a behind-the-scenes image from the final taping week, posted quietly by a former lighting technician clearing old hard drives. In the background, while cast members smiled for a group shot, the child star appeared distant, gaze unfocused, posture withdrawn. Observers debated whether the interpretation was projection. Children get tired, expressions shift. A single image cannot define a narrative. Yet the accumulation of fragments, the podcast recollection, the mediation record, the consultant's brief contract, created a pattern. The discovery was not evidence of evil. It was evidence of strain. Psychologists specializing in former child performers explain that chronic performance stress can manifest as emotional volatility, dissociation, or burnout. When combined with contractual obligations and public scrutiny, symptoms may intensify. Importantly, none of these are moral failures. They are human responses. What the public once interpreted as a mysterious disappearance now looked increasingly like a protective retreat, possibly initiated after internal recognition that continuation would cause further harm. There were no court indictments, no exposé documentaries naming crimes, but there was enough to reframe the narrative. The question shifted from what did the child star do to what was happening around the child star. Discovery, in this case, did not uncover scandal. It uncovered context. And context can be more unsettling than accusation because it implicates systems rather than individuals. The fragments did not form a smoking gun. They formed a mosaic, one that suggested the final days of the show were not explosive, but fragile. And fragility, when hidden behind bright lights and scripted laughter, can go unnoticed until long after the curtain falls. The word cover-up suggests smoke-filled rooms and shredded documents. Reality is usually quieter. In the entertainment industry, concealment often looks like refinement. Language is softened, narratives are streamlined. Complications are absorbed into corporate phrasing until they no longer feel like complications at all. After the show's abrupt end, there was no investigative headline, no whistleblower lawsuit, no televised reckoning. What followed instead was controlled messaging. Press responses became uniform. When reporters asked why the series concluded without a formal finale, network representatives cited creative evolution. When asked about the child star's future, statements emphasized support and appreciation without offering specifics. Nothing inflammatory, nothing falsifiable. That consistency was deliberate. Media strategists understand that repetition creates stability. If every outlet receives the same phrasing, speculation has little oxygen to grow. Stories require friction. The network provided none. At the archival level, adjustments were subtle but noticeable. Promotional images highlighting the child star as the singular focus were replaced in some digital spaces with ensemble photos. Streaming platform descriptions shortened individual character summaries. Award nomination campaigns, once centered around the young lead, were reframed as recognition for the cast and crew. It was not erasure, it was redistribution. Industry analysts often describe this approach as brand insulation. When a central figure becomes unpredictable, not criminally but reputationally, companies diffuse attention. They do not accuse, they do not defend, they dilute. Meanwhile, contractual obligations were reportedly resolved through private mediation. Such agreements frequently include non-disclosure clauses, especially when minors are involved. NDAs are not proof of wrongdoing. They are common tools used to protect privacy and financial interests, but they do limit public understanding. Former executives, speaking generally about similar cases, note that networks have strong incentives to avoid public disputes involving children. Sponsors prefer certainty. Shareholders prefer continuity. Public controversy, even minor, can ripple into advertising markets. So silence becomes strategy. Inside the studio system, conversations likely occurred. Risk assessments, insurance consultations, discussions about long-term viability. When a child performer exhibits signs of burnout or emotional strain, the safest public move is often a quiet exit framed as mutual. No one loses face, no one admits failure. The public receives closure in the form of a tidy press release. What complicates the narrative is that no legal body has accused the network, the family, or the child star of criminal conduct. There are no court findings alleging abuse or fraud. The absence of legal scandal suggests that whatever occurred remained within contractual and psychological boundaries rather than criminal ones. Yet, containment can still feel like concealment. By removing transitional moments from public view, the fatigue, the adjustments, the negotiations, the industry preserved its image of seamless production. Viewers were not invited to witness strain. They were given a conclusion without context. In historical terms, this is not unusual. Entertainment companies have long curated legacies to protect future profitability. Films are remastered, biographies are revised, difficult chapters are condensed into a single neutral sentence: creative differences. Two words that can hold an entire ecosystem of complexity. If there was a cover-up, it was not of a crime. It was a vulnerability. A system designed to manufacture childhood charm may have encountered the limits of that design. Rather than publicly confront those limits, it smoothed them over. From the outside, it looked clean. From the inside, it may have felt abrupt. The most effective cover-ups do not invent lies. They simplify truths until they are no longer recognizable. And in this case, what disappeared was not evidence of evil.
It was the messy reality of pressure, adaptation, and a brand protecting itself. The lights dimmed, the statements were issued, the archives were curated, and the story was left intact, just narrower than before.
It is tempting to simplify stories like this, to label them, to moralize them, to assign a villain and close the file. The phrase, evil child star, spreads quickly because it offers clarity. It suggests corruption at the center, a young celebrity who somehow transformed from innocence into something darker. That narrative is dramatic. It is clickable. It satisfies the human instinct to locate blame in a single face. But real life, especially in the machinery of entertainment, rarely conforms to that structure. Children do not wake up one day and become symbols of moral decay. They respond to environments. They adapt to expectations. They internalize pressure long before they understand its long-term cost. On a television set, applause is engineered. Laughter is amplified. Mistakes are edited out. The illusion of effortlessness becomes part of the brand. A child working within that system learns quickly that performance equals approval. Approval equals stability. Stability equals love. Contracts, income, security. When that equation begins to falter, when exhaustion replaces excitement, when identity becomes fused with a fictional character, the consequences are not always visible. They unfold gradually, internally. What the public witnessed was a disappearance. What likely occurred was recalibration. The fragments uncovered, mediation records, shortened interviews, the hiring of temporary consultants, do not point to criminal wrongdoing. They point to strain, to a moment when the cost of continuing may have outweighed the benefit of staying. That distinction matters, because the most unsettling aspect of this story is not the possibility that a child star was evil. It is the possibility that a system built for profit struggled to accommodate vulnerability. Entertainment industries are optimized for momentum. Ratings must hold. Advertising commitments must be honored. Production schedules cannot pause indefinitely without financial consequence. Within that structure, flexibility becomes limited. When a young performer shows signs of fatigue or emotional volatility, the response is often strategic rather than reflective. Adjust the scripts, redistribute attention, release a statement, protect the brand. Rarely does the public see the negotiation between mental health and market demand. And perhaps that is where the discomfort lies. Because if the narrative were one of scandal, it would be easier to process. Scandal implies misconduct. Misconduct implies accountability. Accountability implies resolution. Here, there was no courtroom resolution. There was only quiet. The silence that followed was not explosive. It was controlled, managed, curated. And that control makes the story feel unfinished. Yet, unfinished does not mean sinister. It may mean private. Former child performers often describe the years after fame as an identity reconstruction process. Without scripts dictating personality traits, they must rediscover preferences, boundaries, friendships. The transition from being watched by millions to being watched by no one can feel destabilizing, but it can also be liberating. In this case, the absence of tell-all interviews or exposés may indicate something unexpected, a deliberate choice to heal outside the spotlight. No viral redemption arc, no dramatic confession, just distance. Perhaps the real lesson is not about evil at all. It is about scale. When childhood becomes a commercial enterprise, the margin for error narrows. Mistakes are magnified. Mood shifts are interpreted as character flaws. Fatigue becomes narrative. But children are not brands. They are developing minds navigating adult expectations. The story that once felt like a mystery about hidden darkness may instead be a study in pressure, the quiet weight of sustaining an image long after it stops fitting comfortably. And in that light, the disappearance looks less like concealment of wrongdoing and more like an act of preservation. Not every unanswered question hides a crime. Sometimes it hides a childhood that never had the chance to be one. If you believe some stories deserve deeper examination, not louder accusations, subscribe for more investigative documentaries that look beyond the surface. Because history isn't always erased. Sometimes it's carefully rewritten.